Welcome to 3 simple steps you can take to improve your selection criteria responses. My name is Richard Branch. I'm the founder and principal instructor at criterial.com.au. I'm a government manager. I've been recruiting in government for about 20 years. What I want to do today is bring you the 3 tips that if you're writing a selection criteria response right now, you can apply these tips quickly and easily and improve your chances of getting an interview. So the first tip is to answer the question. Now that's obviously something you need to do. What I'm going to do though, because selection criteria can sometimes be really wordy in the way they read, is in order to answer the question you need to understand the question. I'm going to give you some ways to do that. The second tip is to talk about your experience, not your feelings. And the third tip is never copy paste. Before we get into discussing the 3 tips, I just quickly want to tell you where Criterial came from. As I said, I've been recruiting in government for about 20 years. In that time, I've read a lot of applications and selection criteria responses written by people who are probably good applicants, but the fact they couldn't construct a response in a way that communicated the things that they needed to and actually address the criteria, they just couldn't be shortlisted for interview. So what I've done is taken all the feedback I've given those people and all that experience over 20 years, packaged it into some online courses that you can take at your own time and at your own pace, to understand everything you need to know from reading the position description to writing your selection criteria response using the STAR method. If you've completed a response to a selection criteria before, the idea of doing another one probably fills you with dread. You feel like it's really confusing, you don't understand what they're actually asking, and you know it's going to take a long time to do. It is a necessary evil though, because to get a job interview, you've got to complete that selection criteria response. The process is also competitive, so you've got to complete it well. What I want to give you in this course and in the other courses I've got available online are the skills you need not only to do that, but to do it really easily and to be able to do it every time you want to apply for a job into the future. So the first tip is to answer the question. And like I just said, sometimes the questions can appear really confusing. So what I'm saying, in order to answer the question, is you actually need to understand what the question is asking. Those really wordy selection criteria, the first thing you should be doing is actually looking to translate them into language that makes sense. And that's as simple as looking at the words in the criteria, looking at their synonyms, and rephrasing the question so it makes sense. So to work through a concrete example of this, there's a criteria on the screen there that reads, drives new thinking by encouraging others to share and debate ideas and data-driven creative solutions. What does that actually mean? By looking at the words and their synonyms, you can actually start to answer that question. So let's look at drive. What does drive mean? Drive means to lead and motivate others to contribute. It also means to energize people and champion a new idea. What about new thinking? New thinking is new ideas, new solutions to problems that nobody's thought of before. New thinking is overcoming obstacles and inefficiencies in new ways. It could be improving the way you do things to deliver better customer service, or it could mean delivering more with less resources. Sharing and debating ideas, what does that mean? So that's really about brainstorming or group discussion. It's kind of like your teamwork and analysis skills, testing ideas to see what might or might not work. It could be an informal process, just in a discussion, or it could be a formal process, like using De Bono's 7 thinking hats, or doing a cocktail party where there's discussion items on the wall and you use post-it notes to post your ideas for that discussion item. So what about data-driven? It could be that you've got data that indicates you've got a problem, what the nature of it is and how big it is. It could also be that you're using data to measure the before and the after of when you've implemented your solution, so you can show whether the solution was effective or not, or created any change at all. And finally, creative solutions. And this is where criteria sometimes get really confusing, because creative solutions is literally the same as new thinking that you've discussed above, where you've talked about new ideas, new solutions to old problems. So you actually don't need to address that part of the criteria again, because you've answered it above. So when you've put all that together, what's the criterion actually asking for? Put together all the synonyms you've just looked at. Basically what the question's asking is something like, when have you led a team to come up with a new idea to fix a problem, and how did you measure it? Or, when have you led a team to come up with an idea to improve a process? Or, when have you identified an issue and led a team to fix it, and how did you measure it? Does that feel like a question you can answer more easily? So that gives you an idea of the type of training you'll also receive in the online courses. Obviously that training is a lot more detailed and goes right back to looking at position descriptions, including their values and mission statements, so that when you're writing your criteria responses, you can incorporate the organisation's values in your own statements to help you resonate with the reader. The online training also talks in depth about government frameworks. When you see these selection criteria in position descriptions, they're almost always literally copy-pasted from these framework documents. By understanding where they come from and the fact that they're repeatable means that you've got a head start on actually being able to answer the criteria, because you'll probably expect to see the same criteria again for different roles you're applying for. What I want to do now is touch on the next tip, tip number 2, which is talking about examples and not your feelings. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they respond to a selection criteria is all they talk about are their thoughts or their feelings or their beliefs. The reason the panel can't consider those is their job is to compare the skills of one applicant against all the others. If all you're talking about is your thoughts and feelings, that's not actually displaying your skills at all. So what you need to do is, when you give a response to a selection criteria, is you need to give workplace examples that show your skills. Think of them as mini case studies. If when you're writing a selection criteria response, you start to see words on the page that go along the lines of, I think it's important to, or I believe that people should, or I feel, and using those kind of statements, you need to stop what you're writing, delete it, and start again. One of the best ways you can lead yourself into a response that addresses the criteria and shows your case studies is to paraphrase that criterion back in your answer. So using the criterion from the last example, you'd paraphrase that back by saying, I have shown that I can lead others to generate new ideas and data-driven solutions when I was working at. So that paraphrasing is going to feel a little bit like you're telling the reader how to suck an egg, but it's going to do two things. One is it's going to tell the reader exactly what you're about to talk about, which is really, really helpful, because a lot of people will start their answers and it starts like a bit of a story. It's almost like it was, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, or it was the best of times and it was the worst of times, and it really doesn't tell the reader what you're about to say. The other thing paraphrasing the criterion does is it then makes you lead into the example. The types of adjectives at that point you need to be using are, I have shown I can, or I have demonstrated I can do this when I was. Those really kind of specific examples that are going to lead you into talking about your case study. So that's the second tip completed, and it's talking about your examples, not your feelings. And it's also how to lead into actually giving your answer on the page by paraphrasing that criterion back in your answer. If you go on and do the online courses, there's a lot more detail about using the STAR method. There's a lot more detail about using I and we statements and the dangers in doing that. There's a lot more practical tips like that, using the criterion to paraphrase in your first sentence back. There's some really practical advice about how to actually go about addressing a selection criteria, and that's what you'll find if you go on to do the full courses online. So the final tip is, don't copy paste. When I say don't copy paste, I include in that don't do a file save as of your last application, and I also include don't copy off someone else's examples. The reason I say that is because they're fundamentally lazy. As I said at the start, getting an interview is a competitive process, and you need to place in the top handful of applications in order to get an interview. If you're lazy and you approach it as a file save as of your last application, and there's some mistakes in there, it's going to show. I use the analogy in some of the other training and in some of my blogs about Olympic athletes train to compete to win. They don't turn up the day before, they don't start training a week before, they don't kind of not worry about their diet. In order to get a gold medal, you've actually got to train hard and you've got to have the intent to win. Applying for a job is the same thing, and you don't want your first impression to your potential new employer to be, you know what, I'm kind of lazy, but I kind of get the job done. There's some other good reasons you shouldn't use examples off the internet. First and foremost is, in giving a response to a selection criteria, you have to describe your work experience. Your work experience is unique to you, and there's no template on the internet that you can get that from. I've actually already given you the template you need, which is to paraphrase the criterion back at the start of your response to make sure you're addressing exactly the example you need to, and then just give your example using the STAR method. That's all you need to do. The other thing about examples on the internet is you've got no idea how good or bad quality they are. If you're not sure how to write a selection criteria yourself, you've got no frame of reference to buy something off the internet and know whether it's any good or whether it's not at all. I discuss examples you can purchase off the internet at length in some of my blogs, so jump onto the webpage at criterial.com.au, go to the blogs and you can read more about it there. That's it for this video. That's about 10 minutes worth of content. If you jump online to criterial.com.au, the selection criteria course should take you between 1 to 2 hours depending on how you pace yourself through it. There's also a course there about cataloguing your career examples and how, if you do that, you can then turn those examples to address any criteria you come across, be it in a job application or an interview. If you're from a military, law enforcement or service background, there's a course there for how to translate your experience into terms that people without that military or law enforcement context can understand in civilian terms. The content will grow with time as more courses get added, so feel free to check back at any time. If you go to criterial.com.au, there's also blogs. I address things like applying for a job in a workplace where you work and some skills and strategies that you can use to do that. I discuss using examples and templates from the internet, a whole lot of other free information that you can go and read at your leisure. So that's all on criterial.com.au. Thanks for listening to this course. I hope it's been of benefit. Those 3 simple skills that you can apply if you're doing a job application now or in future. If you do those 3 things, you're going to give yourself a radically better chance of getting an interview, because they are literally the mistakes in 20 years of recruiting that I've seen the most. Thanks for your time. I'm Richard Branch. Criterial.com.au is the website. Thanks for listening.